Over 2,300 years ago, the Greek philosopher Plato told the story of Atlantis in two of his dialogues. While some people believe Plato's dialogues were fictional, many others assert that the Atlantis story was based on the Minoan culture at Santorini near Greece in the Mediterranean. But in his dialogues, Plato repeatedly insisted that Atlantis was a vast island empire located outside the Mediterranean far into the Atlantic Ocean. He also said that by hopping from island to island, one could reach the opposite continent. Many people have concluded that this means Atlantis was located in the Americas. The possibility that Atlantis was a set of islands near America has led to one of the most intriguing and enduring searches of all time. Was Atlantis located in the Bahamas or the Caribbean? And was a portion of Atlantis discovered in 1968, the very year that the famous American psychic Edgar Cayce said it would happen? I'm Greg Little, and I want to invite you to join us as we search for Atlantis on American Mysteries. Literally thousands of books have been written about Atlantis, but few of them reach the status of a book by a U.S. congressman named Ignatius Donnelly. In 1882, Donnelly asserted that Atlantis was in the mid-Atlantic Ocean and that evidence of this lost civilization could be found in the Americas. Not much research has been done in the mid-Atlantic to find Atlantis, but for over 50 years, people have been searching the waters of the Bahamas for possible ruins. This search for Atlantis in the Bahamas is directly linked to the most famous psychic of all time, Edgar Cayce. Many people recognize photos of Cayce when he was in his 50s and 60s, but his remarkable abilities showed at an early age. In 1890, at the age of 13, Cayce reported a visitation from an angel while he was reading his Bible in the woods. He then discovered he could memorize entire books by simply sleeping on them.
He had a situation in which he wasn't doing very well in his spelling class, and one night his father was testing him on his spelling and he didn't know any of the words. And the little boy said, "How about letting me sleep on the book for about 15 minutes? And then you come back and ask me those questions." And then his father came in, woke him, took the book, and asked him the words, and he knew every one of them. Not only did he know the words on that page, he had told his dad he knew the words on every page in the book and exactly what page they were on.
In 1893, Cayce had to quit school to work on the family farm in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and in 1894, Cayce began working for a bookstore in Hopkinsville where he met Gertrude Evans, whom he married in 1903. In 1900, Casey started his career as an award-winning photographer, but it was his psychic ability that thrust him into international prominence. In 1901, at the age of 24 and suffering from voice paralysis, Casey was placed into a hypnotic trance by a stage hypnotist visiting Hopkinsville. Under hypnosis, Casey's voice returned to normal. Casey then went to a local hypnotist. Amazingly, under a hypnotic trance, Casey described the cause of his throat disorder and recommended a remedy. The remedy worked, and the local hypnotist started to test Casey's ability to diagnose other patients' problems. Soon, a host of medical doctors flocked to observe and test Casey. They found that under hypnosis, Casey was able to not only diagnose their patients' problems, but he could also recommend a course of treatment. After reporters heard a medical association presentation on Casey in 1910, the New York Times published an article about Casey's abilities, calling him a sleeping prophet, and he was flooded with requests from people seeking relief from medical problems. In 1923, Casey hired Gladys Davis, an 18-year-old secretary, to record and transcribe all the readings. She essentially became a part of the Casey family and is credited with preserving all the Casey readings, which are housed in the headquarters of the Association for Research and Enlightenment in Virginia Beach, Virginia. I'm standing next to what many people consider to be the heart of the Edgar Cayce legacy. Within over 400 bound volumes are over 50,000 pages that contain virtually everything Cayce said in his psychic readings. Their existence has allowed researchers to analyze virtually everything Cayce said about the many topics he covered. From 1901 until his death in 1945, Cayce gave over 14,000 readings. About 2/3 of these were on a wide range of health issues. Cayce's remedies were generally holistic and practical, and medical researchers have consistently found that Cayce's diagnoses were accurate about 85 to 90% of the time.
He says each body is a universe unto itself. And so how to deal with that uniqueness. And otherwise he could have given a few hundred readings and been done with the whole business, but he gave over 9,000 because he was dealing with each individual at a certain point in time, and if they come back the next day or next week, it's a different situation, so you have to adapt to where the body is and where the person is. So that's part of that quality of, the cutting edge quality of Cayce that is, you know, the hottest thing we have in medicine and research, and you look at the readings and he's already there. He was there 50, 100 years ago.
Dr. Howe? Hello, Mr. Cayce.
When he gave a reading, Cayce followed the same procedure each time. He removed his coat, loosened his tie and shoes, and then reclined on his back. He folded his arms over his solar plexus and closed his eyes, breathing slowly and rhythmically. Gradually, Cayce entered a hypnotic trance. Another person, usually his wife Gertrude, his son, or a close associate, would then observe Cayce. When Cayce's eyes began to flutter, this person asked Cayce a set of questions that were often given to them in a letter. In 1923, the same year that he hired Gladys Davis to record the readings, Cayce first mentioned Atlantis. Cayce sometimes referred to Atlantis as Poseidia.
And Poseidia will be among the first portions of Atlantis to rise again.
Of Cayce's 14,306 documented readings, exactly 700, or less than 5%, mentioned Atlantis. In 1926, Cayce was asked a series of questions in his Virginia Beach office by a physician, Dr. Thomas B. House. The questions related to the possible existence of oil at the small Bahamas island of Bimini.
You will give a reading on Bimini Island, located in the Atlantic.
Because of a mention of gold on Bimini, almost unnoticed in the reading was CAYCE'S reference to Bimini as once being a part of Atlantis.
Yes. We have the land known as Bimini in the Atlantic Ocean. In the formation of the land, we find this that would make the oil production very low. As to treasure, there are many that are hidden. Among those, larger buried treasures, which consists of gold, bullion, silver, and of plateware or beatenware. The amount here would amount in coin at present to near 120,000 gold coins and much silver. But this is the highest portion left above the waves of once a great continent.
In 1927, CAYCE was brought to the Halcyon Hotel in Miami to determine the exact location of the gold on Bimini. Several of these readings were subsequently loaned to the individuals who requested them. They have never been returned and are the only CAYCE readings that are not on file at the ARE, but 2 of these readings do exist. In Florida, CAYCE's wife Gertrude was handed a detailed question on how to develop Bimini as a resort.
Okay. You will have before you the islands of North and South Bimini and the submerged land adjacent to same. You will outline in detail the necessary procedure to finance and develop this project. You will answer all questions which I will ask you regarding this.
Yes, we have the islands as are seen in the natural formations, as are visible at the present time.
Is this the continent known as Atlantis or Poseidia?
A tipple of the Poseidians was in a portion of this land.
In this reading, CAYCE also indicated that a large vein of gold was located in the inlet area between North and South Bimini Islands. In 1962, a geologist began searching for the gold, and in 1965, 66, and 67, 10 drill holes were made at Bimini, with several of these in the area where CAYCE indicated the gold could be found. No gold was found in the project. As recently as 2007, efforts to confirm the gold vein have continued. No one has ever reported finding gold there. In several readings, CAYCE made it clear that Bimini was an important part of Atlantis. For example, in a 1933 reading, CAYCE related that temples from the Atlantean civilization were to be found near Bimini.
The records of the construction of the Firestone are in 3 places in the earth as it stands today. In the sunken portions of Atlantis or Poseidia, where a portion of the temples may yet be discovered, under the slime of ages of seawater, near what is known as Bimini off the coast of Florida.
In 1940, CAYCE gave his most controversial prediction about Atlantis and Bimini, a prediction that has haunted both believers and skeptics alike.
And Poseidia will be among the first portions of Atlantis to rise again, expected in 68 and 69. Not so far away.
In the late 1960s, a handful of people interested in CAYCE's 1968 and 69 prediction began searching around Bimini for evidence of Atlantis. Among these people were pilots Trigg Adams and Robert Brush. During a flight in mid-1968, Adams and Brush photographed a rectangular formation just off extreme northwest Andros Island, located about 100 miles east of Bimini. This is their actual photo, which we found in the Egerton Sykes collection at the ARE Library. In 1968, the pilots Adams and Brush told a Miami zoologist, Dr. J. Manson Valentine, about the formation they photographed off Andros. In August of 1968, Valentine and an experienced oceanographer, Dr. Dmitry Rebekov, visited the Andros site. Valentine immediately issued a press release stating that the underwater formation was a submerged temple. That same year, Rebekov found an E-shaped formation in the water near what has become known as the Andros Temple, but he could only photograph the E-shaped form from the air. Partly because Andros was difficult to reach in the 1960s, Valentine intensified his underwater search for Atlantis closer to Bimini. On September 2, 1968, 2 local fishing guides took Valentine to a huge stone formation lying in 25 feet of water about a mile off Bimini. This site has become known as the Bimini Road because the huge blocks that comprise the 1,600-foot-long formation resembled an ancient road. It has become one of the most controversial finds in archaeological history. The day after being taken to the Bimini Road, Valentine issued a press release, and newspapers all over the world printed stories with headlines declaring that Atlantis may have been found. Shortly thereafter, several dozen cylindrical columns, some of which were fluted marble, were found near the Bimini Road in shallow water, but we saved this controversy for later. With the intense focus on the Bimini Road in 1968, relatively few people took notice when the commercial pilots Adams and Brush photographed an unusual circular formation off extreme southwest Andros in 1969. Their photo showed what looked like a triple ring of standing stones.
It was 2 rings of rock, and they were perfectly, symmetrical. It wasn't jagged. It was a circle, and inside there was another circle. Now that doesn't look natural. I mean, it didn't look like if it was photographed.
In a 2003 interview, Trigg Adams explained that no one had ever asked him where the circle was. Both Rebekov's E and the circles off Andros were found in 1968 and 1969. The years Edgar CAYCE'S stated that a portion of Atlantis would emerge in the Bahamas. 34 years after their discovery, in 2003, we decided to determine what these underwater forms are. Chartering a high-wing plane from Fort Lauderdale, we started by locating the E-shaped formation found by Dmitry Rebekov and obtained the GPS coordinates on it from the air. We then flew down the southern coast of Andros at low altitude and filmed numerous circular formations in the shallow water. When we reached extreme southwest Andros, we found the huge circle Adams had told us about, exactly where he said it was. Later, we were able to actually see the form on a satellite image. On eastern Andros, the only portion of the island that's inhabited, we joined with a commercial sponge diver to take us to the circles on a small boat. Andros is the largest of all the Bahama Islands, and cutting through the 30-mile-wide island are tidal flows called bights. Small boats can pass through these bights, but often only at high tide. The trip takes a few hours, but the views are spectacular. The enormous circular formation photographed by Brush and Adams back in 1969 turned out to be a small circular coral head with rings of sponge formed around it. When the sponge was exposed by low tide, it looked exactly like standing stone. Turning our attention to the E-shaped formation discovered by Dmitry Rebekov back in 1968, it was only a small partial ring of turtle grass formed around a small coral head. While these finds were somewhat disappointing, our biggest find on Andros would oddly lead us to Bimini and the Bimini Road. While staying on North Andros in 2003, a former dive operator named Dino Keller told us about an underwater stone formation he'd seen off Nicholstown Bay.
I got thinking, Jesus, this is another Bimini Road.
The next morning we walked to the site and I foolishly snorkeled several hundred yards into the Atlantic Ocean while Laura filmed from the rocky beach. I eventually found the unusual formation, and we returned to the site time and again over the next few years. We called it the Andros Platform. It was a slightly curving, three-tiered stone formation about 150 feet wide and 1,200 feet long. It enclosed a small, deep bay. Under areas covered by sand, we found straight seams between stone blocks, and the formation actually got higher as it moved into deeper water. Side-scan sonar of the Andros Platform also showed the three distinct tiers. The formation appears to be a man-made jetty that enclosed a harbor, but we've never found any other artifacts there, which really isn't surprising since hurricanes and violent storms routinely hit this part of Andros. Archaeologists have found similar ancient harbors in the Mediterranean, which are typically attributed to the Phoenicians, Romans, or Egyptians. But in the Americas, the only known ancient harbors are Maya in origin. For example, a small island off Yucatan called Cerritos has a long breakwater enclosing a small harbor. But Cerritos only dates to around 100 BC or so, and the island itself was literally covered with buildings and a seawall. The remains of these structures are still seen at Cerritos, along with pottery scattered everywhere around the island. What we found at Andros looked identical to the ancient harbors found in the Mediterranean. We realized that in order to better understand the Andros Platform, we had to inspect the only other formation in the Bahamas that seemed similar to it. That was the Bimini Road. And this took us directly into the Bimini Road controversy. When the Bimini Road discovery was announced in late 1968, it created a media sensation. While Dmitry Rybakov asserted that the stone formation appeared to be an ancient harbor, many others openly asserted it was the remains of temples or buildings from Atlantis. By the late 1990s, two clear sides had formed on the Bimini controversy. One side, which included Dr. Dmitry Rybakov, Dr. J. Manson Valentine, archaeologist Bill Donato, Dr. Joan Hanley, and Dr. Doug Richards, had come to the conclusion that the Bimini Formation was a man-made structure. All of these people had actually visited and inspected the site numerous times. On the other hand, a Virginia Beach geologist report, a report by John Gifford, and a report by a bachelor's level biologist, Eugene Shin, who worked for the U.S. Geological Survey, were cited as evidence by skeptics that the Bimini Road was completely natural. The skeptics gave 5 major arguments against the Bimini Road being man-made. With archaeologist Bill Donato, we started examining each skeptical claim in a series of expeditions to Bimini beginning in 2004. The first argument by the skeptics is that there are no multiple tiers of blocks at the site, asserting that not a single example of blocks sitting on top of each other exists there. Almost immediately, we found numerous examples of multiple tiers of stone blocks. Why, we wondered, would skeptics claim that none of those were there? Is it possible that these could have been covered by sand back in the 1960s and 70s? Repeated visits to the site over a period of 5 years have shown us that sand movement on the bottom can drastically alter the appearance of the formation from the surface. The second skeptical argument is that all the blocks rest on the bottom, either on sand or on the actual limestone seafloor. We found very few of the stone blocks actually sat in the bottom or on sand. In nearly all areas of the formation, we found that blocks were on top of other blocks, smaller rubble piles, or what looks like an underlying foundation formed from even larger blocks. In fact, skeptics have asserted that the formation is level with the bottom, but in actuality, it's elevated well above the bottom, exactly what a breakwater or jetty does. Again, the continual movement of sand, changing the appearance of the formation from the surface, might have been the problem for the skeptics. Oddly, evidence that shifting sand was a major problem at Bimini emerged in 2006. During an expedition to Bimini in the summer, we found a previously unreported line of stone that had been uncovered by a recent hurricane. This formation was greatly elevated off the bottom and showed many tiers of stone. Laura and Bill Donato, who urged us to look at this location, called it the Paradise Point Pier. A 2008 expedition to the site with a Canadian film crew led us to the conclusion that the new site was another man-made breakwater, but more recent than the Bimini Road. Our aerial film shot from a helicopter shows how this formation runs diagonally off the Bimini shoreline and how there are several lines of piled stones there.
The more we see of it, each time we come, it looks different because the sand, one hurricane will blow sand on one section of it, another hurricane will come and blow that sand off that section, so we're always seeing different parts of it.
The skeptics' third argument against Bimini being man-made is that there are no leveling prop stones or support stones under any large blocks. This argument was also disproved. Under some of the largest blocks, we found piled stacks of cut rectangular stones that appeared to serve as leveling blocks. In 2006, with a film crew from NBC News, we removed several of these rectangular blocks as well as wedge stones, all clearly bearing distinctive traits of being cut and placed by human hands. We found dozens of these cut rectangular blocks scattered all around the Bimini Road. These appeared to be identical to the flat stone blocks used at ancient Mediterranean harbors. The fourth argument put forth by the skeptics is that there are no tool marks on any stones or any human artifacts at the site. But archaeologist Bill Donato has found numerous tool marks on the Bimini Road stones over the past 25 years or so. We also found several areas where cut marble were buried under huge blocks, as well as numerous examples of more tool marks. And then, unexpectedly, near the Bimini Road, we discovered literally dozens of stone anchors, which were similar to stone anchors found in the Mediterranean. One of the stone anchors, identical to Phoenician anchors, was dated to 30 BC by radiocarbon tests that could be done because the stone turned out to be carbonate. Stone anchors in the numbers we found are typically only found near harbors. In short, all of the skeptics' major arguments about the Bimini Road being natural were clearly wrong. But one final argument of the skeptics had to be addressed. That was the claim that all the blocks dipped toward deep water. The tilt or dip of the blocks was first investigated because natural beach rock always tips toward deep water. When beach rock forms from carbonate and sand hardening on the shoreline, it shows a distinctive tilt toward the water rather than being flat or tilted toward the land. If all the stones actually dipped toward deep water, it meant that the formation was, in fact, probably natural. On the other hand, if all the stones did not tilt to deep water, it meant that the stones had been placed there. Oddly, the claim that all the stones dipped to the deep water turned out to be the easiest myth to dispel. Skeptics cite two easy-to-find articles by Eugene Shin, who performed 17 cores on the stones to show the orientation of their top surface. This supposedly determined the tilt of the stones. Shin published articles stating that his original research showed that all the stones tilted or dipped to deep water. But we obtained a copy of Shin's actual research results in an article Shin doesn't make available. And much to our surprise, the article related that less than 1/4 of the stones dipped toward deep water. In essence, using his own criteria, Shin proved that the formation wasn't natural. When Shin was questioned about why his later reports inaccurately stated that all the stones dipped toward deep water, he related that the research was done for fun and that any mistakes in his later reports were the result of his peers not reviewing the work. After extensive correspondence with Shin, I concluded that the skeptic's claim that the Bimini Road was a hoax was itself the real hoax. By 2006, we had essentially proven that the Bimini Road was actually what Dmitry Rybakov said it was back in 1969. It was the remains of an ancient harbor. Nearby it is a related harbor work and even a line of stone circles with stone anchors strewn on the bottom. Bimini shows the traits of ancient Greek, Roman, and Phoenician harbors, but until serious archaeological work can be undertaken there, the origin of the formation remains in question. Our aerial video of the Bimini Road shows how the formation could have easily provided a sheltered harbor.
And Poseidia will be among the first portions of Atlantis that will rise again, expected in 68 or 69, not so far away.
Was the Bimini Road once a part of Atlantis? Did its discovery in 1968 confirm Edgar CAYCE'S 1940 prediction about Atlantis rising near Bimini in 1968 and 69? Both Plato and CAYCE date the destruction of Atlantis to about 10,000 BC. But in 10,000 BC, the actual sea level at Bimini was 90 to 100 feet lower than today. This means that the area where the Bimini Road is found today was on land in 10,000 BC. If there was a maritime culture operating at Bimini in 10,000 BC, the evidence of it would be nearly 100 feet beneath the current sea level. Over the years, several efforts have been made to examine deeper water around Bimini. These efforts have also been made based on CAYCE'S statements.
Evidence of the first and highest civilization of Atlantis will be uncovered in some of the lands to the west and south of the Bahamas. In the sunken portions of Atlantis or Poseidia, where a portion of the temples may yet be discovered, under the slime of ages of seawater, near what is known as Bimini off the coast of Florida.
The temple CAYCE referred to in his 1933 reading on Bimini was a hall of records containing a cache of tablets supposedly containing the history of Atlantis. And finding this temple has been one of the major objectives of people searching around Bimini.
Off the coast of a Bahamian island called Bimini, in the deep water of the Gulf Stream. It's an ancient Atlantean temple that went down during the violent earth changes period.
While using side-scan sonar at Bimini in 2007, we were led to a spot by Krista and Esley Brown. We were all astonished to find what looked like the ruins of a collapsed temple.
There are two big stones on this end, and the one furthest toward the island looks like a pillar, like a huge pillar.
Rectangular slabs and long beams of polished white marble were scattered around a clearly defined area. It's exactly the type of ruins people have been searching for since 1969. It was a stunning find. But we soon discovered that the ruins had initially been found in 1969 or 70. Oddly, The marble is said to be the remains of a temple shipped from Greece or Italy in the early 1800s to be reconstructed in the States. But a hurricane supposedly sent the cargo ship to the bottom. Earlier researchers reportedly found the ribs of an old wooden ship under 3 layers of marble, and still another shipwreck under that one. The bottom ship is alleged to be Phoenician, but none of the reports say how that was determined. Our side-scan sonar of the marble ruins do show contours on the bottom, indicating that a ship may well be under the scattered marble. The marble ruins are indeed intriguing, but we decided that since others related it was a ship ruin, we would forego any more exploration at the site. One big problem at Bimini, especially in shallower water, is that ship cargo and wrecks are scattered everywhere. We've examined numerous shipwrecks in the area and found granite blocks along with other materials, obviously from shipwrecks. But if something from Atlantis really is near Bimini, many people believe that it would be along the coastline that was present in 10,000 BC. And this fact led to one of the most promising finds ever made at Bimini. The initial find was made in 2006, and we investigated it in 2007. In November of 2006, the ARE sponsored a project that Bill Donato performed, the side-scan sonar project, and they found a few things out here. They tried to find it, these underwater rectangular forms, but they couldn't find it. So we've come out using our side-scan sonar and with the basic GPS found this site within 10 minutes. And it's in about 90 feet of water, right on the edge, right where it drops off to 110 feet and then on down into the Gulf Stream. And Chris and Brown are going to dive it. We don't have a lot of dive gear with us, and they're used to deeper dives and looking around, so they're going to dive it. Laura's going to video, and we'll see what this is. But this is probably the most promising site for underwater structures at Bimini that anybody's found. It's a might be. That is, it might be something, and we'll know in just a minute.
There's this one formation that's the largest, and it's roughly a rectangle, and it's almost directly under the boat.
Krista and Esley Brown dove down to the rectangular forms and found they were located on the edge of an ancient shoreline 90 feet below the water surface. The water was murky and had swift currents, but they managed to take a few photos. With digital enhancements on the photos and converting them to black and white, we were able to see that the forms the Browns saw were made from coral-encrusted stone. Some of the stones seemed to be piled building blocks forming a foundation. In May of 2009, we returned to this site while filming a documentary with the History Channel. Laura and I dove to 110 feet and also obtained several hours of underwater video using our drop camera. We found over 30 distinctive square and rectangular formations lying on a flat, sandy bottom located at the edge of the 10,000 BC shoreline. But because our bottom time was limited to 15 minutes, we could only look at 2 of them while diving. The formations were covered in coral and ranged in size from 12 by 20 feet to 20 by 24 feet. All had clearly defined sides, 3 to 5 feet tall. In several places, there are what look like building blocks embedded into the coral-covered walls. One formation showed what seemed to be a ramp. And others had depressed center areas, indicating that the structures could well have been collapsed buildings where sand gradually filled the center. These formations are so well defined and consistently oriented that they seem to have been a series of buildings at the edge of the 10,000 BC shoreline. And by definition, any ruins at the 10,000 BC shoreline would date the time of Atlantis. In 2010, we returned to the rectangular structures and obtained closer film, which showed that many of them seemed to be littered with small building blocks. And later in 2010, an ARE-sponsored expedition examined the insides of several of these formations. They found numerous small building blocks in the interiors and other human artifacts. These structures do, indeed, appear to be man-made, but a more thorough investigation is needed. While more work is needed at these enigmatic formations, they are the best evidence ever found anywhere in the world for Atlantis. We know that skeptics will say that they are coral reefs, but we simply ask, what would one expect to see if small stone building structures were submerged for 12,000 years in an area where coral readily grows? In brief, you'd see exactly what these structures look like. While we cannot say definitively that these formations are the remains of an Atlantean port, they surely look like it, and we believe that a portion of Atlantis may now have been found. One of CAYCE'S most intriguing readings about Atlantis and Bimini was made in 1932. In it, CAYCE recommended that a survey be made to the south and west of Bimini.
Evidence of the first and highest civilization of Atlantis will be uncovered in some of the lands to the west and south of the Bahamas, especially or notably in Bimini and in the Gulf Stream or in this vicinity.
One Bahamas area to the south and west of Bimini is CAYCE'S Bank. In 2006, we went to CAYCE'S and examined another harbor-like formation of stone. We concluded that other remains of ancient maritime cultures had to be in this area. Based on CAYCE'S suggestion and the fact we'd seen several intriguing formations from the air over the Great Bahama Bank, we returned to Andros. Our Andros search was on both land and water. We explored numerous caves and then found a large stone wall on Andros on a cliff not far from the Andros platform. The wall is almost completely covered by dense vegetation. Unexpectedly, we also found several crashed planes on land, at least one of which had been reportedly missing in the Bermuda Triangle in 1968. Several other planes we found were the correct make and model of aircraft that disappeared into the triangle, but they had no identification numbers on them.
It's a fuel tank? It's a beach craft.
In 20 feet of water on the Great Bahama Bank off West Andros was another crashed plane. The plane was in the center of a massive dark spot that had long been a mystery to many people who saw it from the air. In 2007, we examined 31 different underwater features on the Great Bahama Bank that we'd initially spotted from the air. We found a huge anchor, dumped canisters, and appliances, and several intriguing formations of stone. But we didn't find what we were looking for, building ruins. In 2008, we made another aerial search of a different portion of the Great Bahama Bank. Flying over a 5-mile wide and 150-mile-long swath of water, we identified over 100 intriguing spots lying under the shallow water. All of them will eventually be investigated, but for the moment, they remain unsolved mysteries. The possibility that Bimini in the Bahamas might be somehow linked to ancient Atlantis is mired in controversy. But there are vast areas of the Bahamas that have been completely unexplored.
Now there, that looks interesting, doesn't it? It does,
In 2007, while exploring off North Andros, a longtime Andros resort owner named Diane Knowles told us about a stone wall that had been on an island off Jolters. The wall, she related, had been partially destroyed by hurricanes, but portions of it remain.
At a high water or, you know.
Yeah.
But like I said, this thing came like out off this point
Right.
here. This is where I saw an actual part of the wall.
Jolters is a chain of small, uninhabited islands extending from North Andros toward Bimini for about 10 miles. The island where the wall was found can only be reached at high tide, and then only in boats with a draft of a foot or so.
Exploring by water, never easy. Whatever can go wrong will go wrong. Do the best you can do, go from there.
While at the site, we explored all of the island itself.
Well, we've walked several miles up the coast of the northernmost island of Jolters, and basically we found very little except a lot of stone, and in a few places, just a couple, are just tantalizing little bits and pieces, such as this area. Looks almost like some of these are building blocks and could have been used in a building that was swept away by a hurricane or some other storm, but it's probably totally natural. Nevertheless, we found one really intriguing structure here underwater, and it looks like a stone wall.
We found that the wall is completely underwater, and it begins in an inlet between two islands. An elevated flat platform made from cut blocks of stone appears to have served as a loading platform. This large platform was actually visible on satellite photos of the area. Portions of the wall ran diagonally out of the inlet toward deeper water, but most of the wall had sank beneath bottom sand. Actually, there appear to have been two stone walls at the site, perhaps creating a dredged channel from deep water into the inlet. Several lifelong fishermen in Andros told us the stone wall has always been there. Could this enigmatic formation somehow be related to the harbors at Andros, CAYCE'S, and Bimini? In truth, we don't know. But we do know that a lot more exploration has to be done on the Great Bahama Bank and in other areas of the Bahamas. If Edgar CAYCE'S was correct, remnants of the Atlantis civilization should be found in numerous spots of the Bahamas. In 2010, two other unexpected discoveries were made near Bimini. The first was made about 10 miles to the south of Bimini in an area where the deep bottom rises up to about 20 feet below the surface. In this area, there were huge granite slabs scattered around in various places. Some of these were arranged in holes that had the appearance of rooms cut into the bedrock. While the slabs might appear small, when a person is in the shot, their immense size is apparent. Also in this area was what appeared to be steps carved into the sides leading to a pathway. This enigmatic area does have the appearance of some sort of structure, but the greatest surprise came just off the shore of South Bimini. After a storm in late 2009, Esley and Krista Brown noticed that an underwater area close to shore had been exposed by shifting sand. When we saw the area in 2010, I was immediately struck by a find made by Count Pino Tirola back in 1969. While snorkeling off South Bimini, Tirola reported that he had seen what he described as a large mass of about 30 stone columns and slabs lying in 20 feet of water. Efforts to find the area later from a boat proved fruitless, and skeptics asserted that Tirola had become confused by the columns found off North Bimini earlier. But what we saw in 2010 initially appeared to be the ruins of a building outlined by straight foundation walls. The structure is about 45 feet long and 20 feet wide, and appears to have been divided into two rooms. In late 2010, an ARE team found that the outer walls extended down into the sand at least 4 feet on all sides, and that it's composed of long stone slabs that have fused together from carbonate processes. This structure appears to be the one first reported by Tirola in 1969, one of the years Edgar CAYCE stated that a portion of Atlantis would rise near Bimini. More research on the formation is planned. The legacy of Edgar CAYCE does not rely on CAYCE's readings about the ancient world. His readings on health and spirituality continue to be an inspirational source for millions of people around the world. But the fact that CAYCE pinpointed Bimini and other areas in the Bahamas as important parts of ancient Atlantis has created one of the greatest mysteries and most intense searches of our time.
The Earth went through many changes, physical changes, and eventually earthquakes, violent eruptions and changes in volcanic activity caused these major continents of Mu and Atlantis to break up into islands, and even those islands eventually broke up. What we have now in the Pacific and the Atlantic are just the tips of the remnants of Atlantis and Mu.
Evidences of this lost civilization are to be found in the British Honduras, Yucatan, and America. There are some protruding portions within this that must have at one time or another been a portion of this great continent.
Sooner or later, we'll know the truth.
Miss Sales?
Nice to meet you.
Dr. House? Mr. CAYCE.